Well, there's two different issues there. So one is how should we think about climate, and then there's how do we think about climate, which I think is, in effect, we think about it the way that the green movement has really laid out. And let me first say how I think about climate. So what I'm interested, so if you think about with any thought process and with any decision, you have a goal, and it may be named, it may not be named, but you have some kind of goal that you're measuring things as good or bad by. And my goal is human flourishing. That is, I want people to be able to live the best lives possible. I want them to be able to live at their full potential. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to climate, the goal is, how do we have the most livable climate, or how do we have the greatest degree of climate safety? Mm-hmm. And part of that is what is happening with the natural climate. Mm-hmm. And then part of it is what is happening to our ability to cope with climate. Now, I think there's a vigorous scientific debate about what is happening and what will happen with the natural climate. So far, what we've seen in action is a mild warming that has been going on well before we had significant CO2 emissions. Mm-hmm. The concern is that we will have much more rapid warming that will be hard to adapt to in the future. Now, mm-hmm. that worry about future rapid warming is based on climate prediction models that so far do not have a very good track record of predicting climate. But more important than that, if you look at our actual relationship to climate, overwhelmingly, the most important component is not the natural climate that we face, but our ability, our power to manage that climate, to cope with it, to adapt to it. And the fundamental thing, if you were going to name one thing that empowered us, that made the difference between whether we are victims of climate or masters of climate, it has always been our ability to harness energy and technology. So a statistic we talk a lot about, but I think people don't really take seriously. They'll name it and they'll think it's interesting. Well, I say they. Very few people will name it, but even those who do don't really grasp its full magnitude. And this is the idea that climate-related deaths, which is our best measurement of climate-related danger, of our ability to adapt to climate, have declined by over 98% over the last century. And why is that? It's not because the climate has become more hospitable to human life. It's because our environment has become more hospitable because we have improved our environment. We have done things like created much more resilient buildings. We have done things like create air condition and heating systems. We have done things like given ourselves the ability to use satellites to look at what the storms that are coming in 10 days from now or 5 days from now. And so in the worst case scenario, we can get out of town. We've done all of these things with technology, with wealth, with energy. And that has made us resilient from climate-related threats. And now if you're talking about climate-related threats that are occurring over the span not of 5 or 10 days, but a century, we have an enormous ability to adapt. And so then if you think more broadly about energy is not just about climate adaptation, it underlies our ability to do everything that keeps us alive and makes our lives worth living. The energy industry is the industry that powers every other industry. And so the more energy that we have and the more affordable it is, the more empowered we are to do everything that enhances human flourishing. And so if you think, okay, maybe climate will be there will be challenges related to it over the course of the next century, but energy is such a high value, and this is part of our argument. Fossil fuels are so superior to alternatives that it would be completely detrimental to try to lower the amount of warming by robbing ourselves and starving ourselves of energy. And that's essentially our view. It's not that there's not climate change. It's not even that it's not necessarily going to be significant and have downsides. It's that the downside of robbing yourself of energy swamps all of the alleged benefits that would come from starving yourself of energy and having the global average temperature increased by a degree less. This gets to the second point that I didn't get into, which is how climate is usually thought of, particularly by people who call themselves environmentalists or ecologists or the green movement. And this is that if you look carefully at how they talk about things, the goal is not climate safety. It's not how safe are we from climate. It's we shouldn't change climate. Their goal in the area of climate is unchanged nature, the climate that would have existed if we had never existed. And so they're not trying to maximize human flourishing, they're trying to minimize human impact on the climate. And more broadly, their whole philosophy is that we shouldn't be impacting nature in ways that are net beneficial to ourselves. It's that we should be impacting nature as little as possible. It's that we should not be building pipelines, we shouldn't be building dams, we shouldn't be building nuclear plants. In the end, we shouldn't even be building solar and wind farms, which have a huge impact on an environment. It's that we should, in effect, try to exist with as little influence or effects in the world as possible. And yet, the whole way that we actually live and survive as human beings is to impact nature. It's that we transform nature, because you think, what does nature give us? It gives us very little in the way of resources, and it gives us a huge amount in the way of natural threats. And so if you're born into a world where there's a lot of threats and very few resources, then the only way that you're going to survive is if you minimize the threats and you create resources. And that has huge impact. It has major impact. And so from my perspective, what the green movement is really doing is saying that human flourishing is the wrong goal, that we should not value human beings living to their best because we're against what they have to do to live to their best. And instead, what we should do is seek to, in effect, come as close to a total suicide of the human race as we can without actually committing it. Although there are a few kind of fringe greens who say, in effect, we should commit it. And I think it's certainly something I disagree with. But their basic argument is they think, well, no, what you should do is live in harmony with nature. But human beings can't live in harmony with nature. Okay. When we, quote, lived in harmony with nature, we died at 30. We can only die